and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Has the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, been vindicated as the Daily Telegraph reveals the content of her secret deal with Rishi Sunak, which committed to slashing legal migration? Last week's numbers revealed 672,000 in 1 year, mainly in Rishi Sunak's time in office. Will this only be controlled when Sunak stops being so dogmatic about being catatonic? Meanwhile, on the streets of London this week, we saw a tale of 2 cities. On Saturday, we saw the return of a jihadist rally with more calls for Muslim armies to invade Israel and a GB News reporter being tormented at the protest. Meanwhile, on Sunday, we saw placards such as "Spread hummus, not hate," calls for unity, and of course, as ever, a rendition of the national anthem. Unfortunately, I couldn't stand up for that because the camera's in the wrong angle. Anyway, in other news, the Bank of England is under fire for its democratic deficit, focusing too much on net zero, which is not really its business, and too little on inflation with no accountability. These are the people in charge of Britain's monetary policy, and it's time they focused on their real responsibilities. Plus, a new book has a bad word to say about every member of the royal family except the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. The runaway royals maintain they had nothing to do with the book in question, but that seemed stretching the truth last time. So, here we go, and my teleprompter is stuck, but I'm going to be joined by people. State of the Nation. I'll be joined by a theatrical panel of the criminal barrister and former Tory MP, Jerry Hayes, and the author and broadcaster, Amy Nicole Turner. As always, as you know, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, we bring you some breaking news at the start of this bulletin, some good news too. Israeli hostages are being released by the terror group Hamas right now to the Red Cross in Gaza. Some reports suggesting in the last half hour that Hamas has received a list of prisoners and that will be released today. We understand women and children are included among those hostages. Israeli military just said Red Cross has confirmed 11 hostages are on their way to Israel. So that's just been confirmed by the Israeli military as I was speaking. The Red Cross confirming 11 hostages are on their way to Israel. And that comes as a humanitarian truce between Israel and Hamas had been extended for 2 more days. And it was Egypt, wasn't it, earlier on that was saying it expected 11 Israeli hostages to be released today. Negotiations, we understand, ongoing for the release of 33 Palestinians in return. Hamas has released 58 women and children so far, 11 more to come. Israel has freed 117 Palestinian prisoners. We're expecting the release of further Palestinians this evening. We'll keep you up to date on that, of course, as it happens. Meanwhile, in news here at home, the Home Secretary has said the business model of people smuggling gangs will be destroyed as he tried to underline the government's commitment to stopping illegal migration today. He was speaking in the House of Commons as he faced questions there for the first time as Home Secretary. James cleverly said the government is doing all it can to stop the small boat crossings.
People who are being smuggled are seen as just products. They are expendable in the eyes of those people smugglers, and we have to do everything we can, and we will do, to break their business model. I commend the work of my right honourable friend, the Immigration Minister, who has recently been to Bulgaria, where in close cooperation with our international partners in Bulgaria, we have seized boats, we have seized engines, we are breaking the business model.
James cleverly. Well, nearly £30 billion is going to be invested into new business projects in the UK. The Prime Minister was telling a global summit today that there is positive momentum in the UK economy, particularly in the science, tech and creative sectors. Rishi Sunak said the UK's low tax approach and culture of innovation had given it a competitive advantage. Health news, and the UK's first case of a new strain of swine flu has been detected in North Yorkshire. The Health Security Agency saying the person contracted what's known as the H1N2 strain, similar to a virus found in pigs. That person has since fully recovered after experiencing what's being described as a mild illness. But there is now increased surveillance in surgeries and hospitals in Northern England as the authorities try to work out exactly where the infection came from. New disciplinary powers for police chiefs could be introduced next year. They're expected to make it easier for bosses to sack officers who've been found guilty of wrongdoing, while also allowing senior officers to preside over misconduct hearings. It follows plans unveiled by the government early this year aimed at restoring public trust in policing. And finally, an agreement has been struck between the government and England's top doctors. It could mean an end to strike action. The government's agreed to increase the total pay award for consultants by 4.5%. Union members will now vote on that proposal, and if it's passed, strikes will be called off. That's the latest news. This is GB News. Across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio, and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
The question of mass migration could cost the Tory party the next election. Mass migration is not the norm in our history, it's the exception. And never before has there been such a large movement of people. And there's no reason to accept this as the status quo. Net migration stands provisionally at 672,000 for 2023, and this when we've got a government that promised to get the numbers down into the tens of thousands, and it lets down an electorate that has given repeated mandates to get the numbers under control. As I said last week, legal migration is technically an easier problem to solve than illegal migration. It doesn't involve human rights. It doesn't particularly involve the courts. It is an administrative system that can be changed by secondary legislation. Moreover, it seems the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, had a plan to deal with this, one that could work and get numbers under control. The Daily Telegraph has seen the agreement between Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak that was agreed in return for Suella's endorsement last year. Suella's crucial endorsement, because had she endorsed Boris Johnson instead, he would probably be Prime Minister now rather than Rishi Sunak. So it was worth getting her agreement for her four-point plan, which set out to return net migration numbers to below pre-Brexit levels of 239,000, just over a third of the current number. The first point was to raise the salary threshold of skilled foreign workers from £26,200 a year to £40,000. The second was to restrict the number of dependents entering the UK. Dependents made up a quarter of non-EU student immigration and nearly 50% of non-EU work immigration. Third was to axe the 2-year stay after a graduate visa, reduced down to a 4-month grace period. Study is the largest component of non-EU migration. And last, the fourth point, was to crack down on Mickey Mouse degrees for foreign students, which don't particularly help our economy. The then Home Secretary also proposed scrapping the really scandalous shortage occupation list, which enables companies to pay 80% of salaries to foreign workers, giving them an incentive to say that they suffer from a shortage and undercutting the domestic workforce, making the country overall poorer. In other words, the former Home Secretary was serious about tackling mass migration. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister today at Hampton Court Palace at an investment summit seemed to encourage even more migration.
But we don't have a monopoly on talent in this country. And we recognise that nearly half of our most innovative companies have an immigrant founder. So if you're an innovator, an entrepreneur, a researcher, you should know that the most competitive visa regime for highly skilled international talent is right here in the UK.
The government was questioned today on the migration figures, and the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, gave this response.
I've already announced a specific policy with respect to dependents, which comes into force at the beginning of next year. We think that will have a substantive impact upon the levels of net migration, but as the Prime Minister has said, we're keeping all options under review and will take further action as required.
But at most, the reforming measures to dependents will cut numbers by about 150,000. That would still leave us with over 500,000 net new migrants. And this is too much. James Cleverly, the current Home Secretary, said he is still reviewing measures to curb migration, but I don't think he needs to look much further than his predecessor's plan. Henry VI, who became king in 1422, suffered from catatonic inertia for 18 months, beginning in the middle of 1453. Since then, we've never had so inert a government until perhaps today. The current government seems similarly inert and needs to awake from its catalepsy if it wishes to win the election. As always, I want to hear from you, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now I'm delighted to be joined by the former Labour advisor, Scarlett Maguire. Scarlett, thank you so much for coming in. Obviously, immigration hasn't been taken control of. Do you think a Labour government would be able to control migration? Would it want to control migration?
Well, I think Keir Starmer has made it clear that he wants British jobs for British workers. He didn't quite say that. He said he wants British doctors. So I mean, what we have to do, the first thing we have to do is we have to skill people up. I mean, it is incredible that we are still going, particularly to the Philippines, but all over Asia, for health workers. These are skilled people. We should be training our nurses. We should be training our doctors. I mean, if you go to the NHS, as I use it unfortunately too often, the odds of getting a British-born worker is quite low. I mean, they're fantastic, right? Lots and lots of people from the Philippines. But why aren't we doing it? Why did we cut nurse bursaries? Why is there numbers? And the problem with the Suella thing about putting up the salary is we have 150,000 vacancies in social care. They are not paid £40,000 a year.
No, indeed. But we had a shortage with HGV drivers, and that shortage has been removed by easing some of the regulations, but most importantly by raising the pay. And one of the things that open migration does is cut the pay. It's why I'm so concerned about the shortage professions, because then you pay the people you bring in 20% less, which of course gives you an incentive not to employ British people.
I agree with you, but I mean, your government is not paying. I mean, there have been nurses' strikes, which they are not paying, and I mean, so the problem is care workers don't go on strike. So we're talking what? There's 300,000 between them. Shortages. So actually, yes, do put up the price. I mean, do put up the salary, but that's going to cost us.
Yes, in the short term. But one of the other things that we've got as an economic problem is no productivity growth. And in the public sector, productivity is lower now than it was in 1997, which is an appalling record. But one of the reasons for that is we bring in cheap labour, which gives you no incentive to invest in improved technology and so on. In Japan, they're using AI, they're using remote monitoring to reduce the cost of social care because the cost of labour is very high and you have more skilled people earning more. And I cannot understand why we're not going down that route. And
Jacob, you have been in government for 30 years.
Well, not me personally.
Well,
I've been on backbenches most of the time.
But still government, right? You've been voting this through. I mean, what I look at, and I think every time the government talks and talks and talks and they do nothing, and that's what we have to understand. And can I say, the thing about Suella is she was just talk. I mean, nothing happened on her watch. Nothing got better. Things just got worse. She could have sorted out illegal migration. She could actually have stopped the backlogs. And instead, everything was about Rwanda, which is just performative. It will never work.
I think sorting out illegal migration is actually much harder than legal migration. That legal is so much more directly under the government's control and less subject to human rights and legal actions. But rather than trying to say who's to blame, because one can go back a long time and look at all sorts of people to blame, isn't it worth looking at how you make this better?
No, this is what I'm trying to do. But what I'm saying is I don't think it helps somebody like Suella who goes on about lefty lawyers and woke people and awful judges and all of that. I mean, actually, what she's doing is she's losing you the election and, frankly, possibly losing you your seat. Because the thing about Suella is she's toxic, right? So there are lots of people who voted for you because they like you and they think, I can't vote Tory again, I'm going to vote Lib Dem. That is the problem with people like Suella, is actually they're on a personal crusade and they're going to bring down the government.
Well, and we'll have to see what happens at an election. I think you've got some people, of course, who think that. You've also got people who think this government promised to get the numbers down in the tens of thousands and has failed.
But you can do that without being rude about people.
I don't disagree.
Right?
I don't disagree with that. But that's where we failed, and those voters are being tempted by reform.
Oh yes, no. I mean, you're losing everybody.
It's quite a squeeze, isn't it?
You're losing everybody.
And my sort of fundamental point, that I've made again tonight, is why aren't we getting on with things? I mean, you advised Tony Blair. Surely when he was in government and he said he had a plan B, at least something was announced the next day. I mean, I could go into comments about spin and cheap political points of that kind, but at least something was going to be announced, whereas we've now had a fortnight and it's silence.
Well, and actually, I mean, it's interesting. So the shadow Home Secretary had Plan A and Plan B. If the Supreme Court went one way, they had a plan. If the Supreme Court went another way, what beggars belief is that nobody knew, presumably, nobody knew which way it was going to go. So you're right, you plan both ways. But also, Rwanda is not the answer. I mean, that's what is so... Rwanda, even if it is allowed to go ahead and goes ahead perfectly, both of which I don't think would be true, we're talking hundreds, right? I mean, we are not talking the answer to immigration.
Well, Scarlett, thank you very much indeed. Coming up, this week's events on the streets of London were a tale of two cities, a jihadist rally on the one hand and a peaceful solidarity march on the other, though some may argue it was slightly different to all of that. And don't forget, Omid Scobie, the ominous, is about to reveal his publicity-seeking scheme. He's the one who's rude about the Princess of Wales, the blighter.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new
It's your new t-shirt. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. We've been discussing mass migration and the Prime Minister's Henry VI-like catatonic state. You've been sending in your views. Colin, consecutive governments have sold this country out when it comes to migrants, both legal and illegal. Why should we believe a word they say on anything? And Elizabeth, why not stop all legal immigration and have only students and stop new refugees? Turn the boats round. We have no homes for us, let alone them. On Friday, the Israelis announced a ceasefire to enable the transfer of hostages from Gaza back into Israel, as well as for humanitarian aid to pass through. 11 Israeli hostages were released within the last hour, with Palestinian prisoners expected to be released next. Around 30 prisoners have been released so far. However, according to the Israelis, terrorists broke the humanitarian truce within a mere 15 minutes. And yet, as we've had several weeks of so-called ceasefire protests, the usual suspects took to the streets on Saturday, not to protest at Hamas's breach of the ceasefire, but to continue to berate Israel. Perhaps it goes to show that they aren't in favour of peace, they simply hate the Jewish state. The Islamists were back in their droves, calling for Muslim armies to invade Israel, with some women getting arrested for their signs reading, "How beautiful it is to be a soldier of Allah," not to mention the fact that GB News reporter Catherine Forster was tormented. So the question is, if a ceasefire won't make the protesters happy, what will? Well, joining me now is a friend of the programme and former Jeremy Corbyn advisor, James Schneider. James, thank you very much for joining me. In the context of the march that took place at the weekend, shouldn't they be marching for peace and to remind Hamas to obey the terms of the ceasefire?
I really have to completely push back on your categorisation of the marches, Jacob. These are peace marches and marching for a permanent ceasefire. Now, when we're talking about breaches of the temporary ceasefire, Israel continued to carry out some operations in the north of Gaza during the ceasefire and have arrested in the West Bank, taken as prisoner in the West Bank, as many people as they have released. So I think it is a ridiculous thing to suggest that the protests were not pushing for peace. Of course they are. They're calling for a full ceasefire, not a return to the bombing, not what the Israeli defense minister briefing troops earlier today said, which is that they would return at the same levels of intensity and throughout the Gaza Strip, north, central and south.
But in terms of the march, a number of people have been arrested, including the ones I mentioned. A number of flags were there, the jihadist flags. Shouldn't those people be outside the marches and the marchers make sure that they're controlling the organisation properly so that they don't have these extremists with them?
Well, the images on the screen right now are of a Hizb ut-Tahrir splinter demonstration, which was outside of the march. Now, the vast majority of the marchers are marching for a righteous cause, which is peace and for the national liberation of the Palestinian people, because there can be no long-term peace until the occupation is ended and there is a just settlement for the Palestinians. Now, of course, with any large march, and we saw the same thing on Sunday as we saw on Saturday, there will be some fringe elements. But the general thrust of the ongoing peace marches are a call for peace, because we can't just have a pause in the killing. We already have something like 1.8 million residents of Gaza displaced from their homes. We have hundreds of children who have had amputations. We have over 15,000 civilians killed, an enormous loss of life, and the entire destruction of the Strip.
But James,
most of it now for rubble.
James, how can we have peace if Hamas uses Gaza as a base for its terrorist attacks, if Israel doesn't actually manage to root out the terrorists?
In order to have peace, we need to have a negotiated settlement between all sides and a long-term solution to the decades-long dispossession of the Palestinian people. That means negotiating.
Thank you, James. Sorry, we've got to move on, but with me now is my panel, criminal barrister and former Tory MP Jerry Hayes, and author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. Jerry, James tells us we've got to have peace, but Hamas has no desire for peace. It wants to destroy Israel.
They want to destroy Israel, and the preachers in this country want to kill every single Jew. This is what we've got at the moment. Jews do not feel safe in this country. Jews do not feel safe within the Labour Party. You have 56 members of the Labour Party in Parliament who voted against ceasefire. And said, oh, ceasefire is so wonderful. It's not. It plays to the hands of the terrorists. It doesn't mean peace.
Amy, isn't that the problem?
I'm a bit taken for words there with what you've said. I think what is clear is that there is extremes on both sides. Hamas is extreme, but it's arguably the Israeli government are extreme in their reaction to the events. Now, there was a ceasefire on October the 6th that was broken by Hamas, but arguably it was broken before that by the behaviour of the Israeli government. And as James points out, the occupation of Israel in Palestine. And I think it's important that we do not conflate British Jews with the state of Israel. And that is the issue. And the rise in anti-Semitism, I think, comes from the belief that Israel is the responsibility of British Jews. Most British Jews haven't even been to Israel. There's absolutely nothing to do with the responsibility of what's going on with the IDF.
That's a really important point.
Yes, absolutely right.
It's reasonable to be critical of the Israeli government without being anti-Semitic. That is a reasonable position for people to hold. But when you come to the marches, doesn't it concern you that the people marching on Saturday are giving cover to the extremists, and that they are associating with themselves with people who actually want to destroy the Israeli state?
There have been extremists on both sides of this conflict, and if we focus on them and we don't look at the actual peaceful resolution, which is including the vast majority of people who are moderates and just want peace, I'm sure the majority of people on the march for a ceasefire would have happily gone on the march against anti-Semitism.
But what is the plan for the ceasefire?
And I'm sure they
What is the plan? I mean, what is going to happen? You have a ceasefire, right? Then you've got to sort it out afterwards. In other words, do you have a two-state system? Are you going to do a deal with Saudi Arabia? What do you do?
Jerry, the conflict has been here before, 2014, 1967.
Yeah.
We've been here before, and turning a country to rubble, turning an area to rubble and killing half of its population. How is that ever going to end the violence? Arguably, Israel is the biggest recruiter for Hamas, because every time a resident of Gaza loses a family member in this conflict, they will arguably be radicalised themselves and go on to fight.
So your foreign secretary, you say to Netanyahu, you say to the head of Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, you're going to solve it by doing what? And don't just say get round the table, because that doesn't work.
Hamas and the Palestinian Authority are not the same thing whatsoever.
I know, that's why I mentioned them both.
The UN needs to go in, and there needs to be a vote to get Hamas out. There has not been a vote on the Gaza Strip since 2006. 50% of the population didn't even involve themselves in that vote because they are under 18 years old. So they need to restore democracy. Well, we need to introduce democracy in the same way that Israel has taken it away by giving the people of the Gaza Strip.
And what do you think Hamas would say about that?
Rights. So half the people who are in the prisons in Israel from Palestine are under 18.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but terrorists don't neatly accept a democratic mandate, do they? So if Hamas were voted out...
But again, you're taking the extreme.
No, but
they are the extreme. That's the trouble.
They are the extreme, and they are in control of Gaza. And it's very difficult to see how you get them out without military action. You have to cut off the head of the snake.
I cannot see how further military action will come to a solution, because it has not done before. I think when you look at the situation of the citizens of Gaza and the rights that they have and the living conditions that they've been under since occupation, then that needs to be dealt with. And I think once Palestine is free, once there are equal rights, once they're tried in the same courts as Israelis, as Jewish Israelis, for example, then you'll get to a solution. You're not going to get to a solution by bombing 50% of the city and making it unlivable.
Thank you to Jerry and Amy. Coming up, children being administered puberty blockers by the NHS doubled since July 2022, despite a government promise to crack down. Where did it go wrong? Plus, I'm joined by a top royal expert to dissect an explosive new book on the Duke and Duchess of Sussex.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's on your teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this remains State of the Nation. We've been discussing the Palestine protests and the Israeli hostages, and we've been getting some of your views, for which many thanks. Alan says, purely a political march, socialist worker and socialist worker placards everywhere. This is why Starmer has told his MPs to stay away. And Elizabeth says, the anti-Israel marches and rallies are mass intimidation, whatever the left say. It's like 1979 all over again, when the left ganged up with revolutionary Islam to overthrow the Shah, who was taking Iran forward to a future like Japan's. The left should take a good, long, hard look at what happened to the left in 1979. In July 2022, the government pledged to crack down on the administering of controversial puberty blockers prescribed by the NHS to those who express a wish to alter their gender. However, alarming new statistics have emerged showing that despite the government's desire to get a grip on the issue, the use of puberty blockers prescribed by the NHS to children as young as 12 has in fact doubled since the promise was made, a statistic which has been described as the most conservative estimate and could in fact be higher. So why has His Majesty's government failed to clamp down on this divisive practice, and what should be done? Amy, surely when the government announces a policy of this kind, it should go into reverse rather than double, just as a general political rule.
Oh, well, I think the word political, I think this was a political move rather than a medical move. It's not supported by any medical evidence. Puberty blockers have been found to be, in a clinical setting with medical supervision, very beneficial.
But the Tavistock clinic's been taken to pieces for its terrible behaviour and the way it's treated children.
The main report from the Tavistock clinic was that there is too much of a demand for these services, and we need to have more centres because of the surging need for people discussing their questioning their gender identity. Now, puberty blockers have been used for precocious puberty, girls starting their periods too early, for years, with no question. Of course, there's going to be potential side effects, but you weigh up the benefits.
But the side effects is really a major problem for people going through adolescence who may find that their whole life is changed by a campaigning group, which the Tavistock Clinic had, who really wanted to encourage people to change their sex.
Nobody encouraged anyone to change their sex. That's
Come on, Jerry.
But can I make one point? Just one
These are children.
If you stop people, if you continue with this conversation that puberty blockers are the devil and we should all absolutely not give them out under any circumstances, what you're going to find is these teenagers are going to buy them on the internet. They're going to find them somehow. No. And that would be a major risk, because they need to be taken under complete medical supervision. And the problem is they probably won't get a...
Come on, isn't this the argument for every illegal drug going?
Look, Alex Carlisle and myself, now Lord Carlisle, were the first people in the House of Commons in the 1980s to actually do a campaign for rights for trans people. There is a tiny minority of people who, from the age of probably 5 or 6, are uncomfortable in their bodies. It is a medical condition and we must help them. But, and I don't want to sound like Suella Braverman in any way sense at all, but if it becomes a lifestyle policy, as it seems to be with a certain number of people who are pushing for this, look, if you're 17, 18, well, over 18, if you're no longer a child, yes, get medical consultation. But we're talking about children. We're talking about children, Amy.
So why would you want to take away their possibility for help? That's all this is. And actually, they would, on average, take about 2 years to get a first appointment. So I think you make a good point, because children aren't accessing the healthcare they need. But that's not because puberty blockers are being handed out like sweets.
Is it the healthcare
That's because we have
they
massive
need?
waiting lists for
Is
this
it the
type of problem.
healthcare they need, Amy? Or is it something they feel they ought to do because there are pressure groups saying you must identify in a certain way?
No.
Look, I don't care how people identify. I really don't. But
like
I
you
do
do.
care if you are actually changing their sex when they are children. It's almost like a mutilation.
I think this whole changing, this use of the word change, is missing the point completely, because you have a gender identity, and it's been proven time and time again that gender-affirming care... Well, how come every psychological body, every medical body disagrees with you and agrees with me?
People are biologically either a man or a woman, except in a tiny number of cases.
Hermaphrodites,
A very, very small number.
You're just both completely missing the whole reality of what it is to be transgender.
He couldn't be Suella. Had he decided to sit there and say, well, actually, I do identify as Suella, that wouldn't have been true. Anyway,
but I could identify as Suella, but I shouldn't be allowed into a woman's changing room.
Quite right, but let's move on to a prestigious parliamentary committee that issued a stark warning to the Bank of England that the politicisation of the institution, particularly over net zero commitments, may act as a hindrance to tackling inflation because of conflicting priorities. The very distinguished House of Lords Economic Affairs Committee said the Treasury ought to prune the bank's obligations and warned of a democratic deficit should a small group of unelected individuals end up wielding too much power. Well, back to my panel. Amy, the Bank of England was given very specific control over interest rates to depoliticise it.
Right.
But if the Bank of England then decides to talk about other random subjects...
Like net zero?
It's got no...
Random subject.
It's got no mandate for that.
Of course.
It's got no mandate
for that. What was one of the biggest drivers of inflation? Energy prices. Of course, our energy security is completely relevant to the work of the Bank of England.
They did nothing on energy security. They just told people they made energy security worse by discouraging banks from lending to oil and gas companies. So they reduced our own supplies in this country. It was absolute dereliction of duty, and it was political, because what's-his-name, Mark Carney, had drunk the green Kool-Aid.
Come on,
Jerry.
Hang on a minute. The green
This is
Kool-Aid.
depressing. I'm agreeing with you about 3 times tonight, Jacob. Look, the Bank of England has been... Go on.
I want to ask Jacob a question.
Oh, Jacob, a question.
What would cost more, net zero or not reaching net zero to the economy?
That's not the point. It's how they make the decision. It's groupthink, which is the problem. Look, the Bank of England's been asleep at the wheel when it comes to inflation. It's like a volcano. They thought inflation's like a volcano. They thought that it was extinct, but it wasn't. It was merely dormant, and that is the problem. They should have raised interest rates at an earlier stage. And so the problem is, and in many ways, God, I feel terrible saying this, in many ways Liz Truss had a bit of a point.
Oh, my God!
There is no, not much of a point. I mean, she wrecked the economy, but that's
much more than the Bank of England ever have.
I agree with that. But there is a point. There is an orthodoxy there. There should be more people on the monetary committee having an alternative view. I mean, probably qualified people, don't have sort of Professor Mitford coming in on it, because he's quite
very distinguished and really understands monetary policy. And the person who got inflation absolutely right was Professor Tim Congdon, who looked at the monetary aggregates, which you would have thought a monetary policy committee should do, rather than wishing on about green targets for which they have no mandate.
But the points that you made, Jerry, are interesting, because their Bank of England have admitted, yes, they may need more intellectual diversity, and that's something they're going to look at.
Oh, yeah, they're going to look at it. They should ease it. Look, quantitative easing, very important. It's pumping more money in when you need it, but they're still doing it. And if you pump more money into the economy, what happens? You get inflation.
I just think
I
would trust an independent Bank of England more than a politician.
So would I.
So would I.
So would I.
What would you give to this independent Bank of England? Would you give it monetary policy? Would you give it fiscal policy? Would you give it immigration policy, which has profound economic consequences? Where do you decide that actually the people we vote for should be in charge?
No, I
wouldn't put them in charge.
We've got to look at the things that impact inflation, and energy security has been proven to be on the top of that list.
We've become fiscal drag queens.
Well, there we go. That's quite a term. Thank you very much. My panel coming up, we'll be flicking through Omid Scobie's book about our royal family. God's sake.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. We've been discussing the government's failure to clamp down on puberty blockers in the NHS and warnings to the Bank of England over net zero commitments. And let's hear your views. Jill says adult social media and charities are to blame for children even knowing about this, puberty blockers. Let children have a childhood. And Peter doesn't want to discuss our subjects. He says, is it my imagination? Your suit jacket left lapel is looking decidedly threadbare. Nice shiny shoes, though. Well, let me confess, some of my suits are 20 years old. They do last remarkably well, and I would tell you who makes them, but that would be advertising, which I'm probably not allowed to do, but they're very good. Edmund Burke once said, I thought 10,000 swords must have leapt from their scabbards to avenge even a look that threatened her with insult. He said this, of course, about Marie Antoinette. But wouldn't you say the same about the Princess of Wales, where today, in a money-making, publicity-seeking scheme, Omid Scobie, the author of Finding Freedom, a book that detailed the lives of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, is back with more royal intrigue and allegations, including criticism of Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales. This odious blighter, thought by some to be the mouthpiece of the Sussexes, attacks our future Queen, as well as the Prince of Wales, whom he portrays as a cold and ruthless figure, eagerly anticipating his ascent to power. Pipsqueak Scobie takes it a step further, alleging that Prince William harbours a formidable temper, expertly concealed in public, and characterising him as reserved on the pitch but unpredictable in private. However, there are questions about the connection with the Sussexes and whether his assertions are influenced by them, despite refusing an association with them previously. Apparently the Duchess had reached out, and reached out is one of those particularly loathsome terms, to Scobie, according to Good Morning America.
And guys, there was so much more in our interview. Omid tells us that he often felt as if he was caught up in a family drama and that Meghan even reached out to him just to check in on him to see if he was okay. He also says that despite rumors, he's actually not even that close with Harry and Meghan and that he never chose Team Sussex.
I'm now joined by royal broadcaster and historian Rafe Hadel-Mancoux. Rafe, thank you for coming in. He is an odious little fellow, isn't he?
Yes, I mean, you know, he has spent so many years now as a propagandist-in-chief to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and let's be clear, they are clearly involved here. We know that he's already said that through friends of his, at least, he has access to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and this is just the latest show in the Montecito World Privacy Tour. It's called Endgame, you know, and it sort of reminds me of one of those superhero franchise films where the royal family are cast as the villains and Team Sussex are the Avengers yet again.
But it doesn't work. He's actually succeeded in making the King, the Queen and the Prince and Princess of Wales more popular because people think, poor them having to put up with these bitter attacks from California.
Well, precisely. I think one has to ask what the motivation is here, and I think the title Endgame can apply more perhaps to Omid Scobie's life than it does actually to the monarchy, because, of course, you know, the Sussex star is fading, and one has to ask, you know, when he served for the last few years as the, you know, the selfie stick in waiting to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, what does the future hold for such a person once that reserve of royal revelations is exhausted, and the tank, as we see from this book, is running empty? This is just a rehash. I mean, rehash would be a much better title for this book than Endgame, and he has to actually think about his future. And I think writing this book now, when he knows essentially the Sussex's popularity is falling, the public have no interest in them any longer, they've become a laughingstock around the world, and their projects are failing everywhere. And I think this book is one of the last big opportunities he has to monetize the monarchy and profit from the monarchy's misfortune, unfortunately.
Well, not really the monarchy's misfortune. I mean, it's a private distress, no doubt, for the King and the Prince of Wales that they're no longer as friendly as they once were with the Duke of Sussex, which doesn't make a blind bit of difference constitutionally. The monarchy, which maintains the support of the British people, and Scobie himself refers to the Princess of Wales as an institutional dream come true. And that's it, isn't it? She has that dutiful appearance, the sublimating of herself to the institution, which is what we admire in our royalty, which the Princess Royal has achieved and the Queen, the late Queen, achieved in being the absolute epitome of duty and service to the country, and not being about their own inner private lives, which, frankly, are a matter for them, not for the British public to worry about.
You couldn't have put it better, Jacob. And as the Queen obviously famously said, never complain, never explain. And I think the last 3 years, since the first of these stories began to come out from Omid Scobie, the royal family's response, which has been to simply ignore it, to carry on business as usual, has been the source of their recent success and the reason why the monarchy continues to ride high. And actually, the contrast between the two camps actually shows the very best of British in our members of the royal family, particularly, as you say, the Prince and Princess of Wales, who've never been more popular with the public.
And it's right as well, isn't it, that all families, no doubt, have their issues that they have to face and overcome. But the privilege of the royal family is so great that they can never complain and maintain public sympathy, that it always looks so utterly self-indulgent. Telling people about the real me is not really for royalty.
I mean, that's exactly correct. And in this book, for example, yet again, we have another rehashing of who made who cry. And one has to think, in this day and age, given what's happening around us on all different sorts of levels, politically, economically, these sorts of trivialities just seem to portray anyone who continues to promote them in the worst possible light.
And that must be right again. I mean, you've had this terrible attack in Israel, 1,400 people killed, and somebody's worrying about whether she was made to cry and whether her sister-in-law was particularly open and
that's
friendly.
my problem here. I mean, I don't mind anyone criticising the monarchy if they're doing it from an educated perspective and they put forward sound and reasoned arguments. I may disagree with them, but this is the most vacuous, sort of shallow and superficial book. It doesn't deserve a place on a shelf with the biographies of people like William Shawcross or Sarah Bradford or Hugo Vickers. This is tittle-tattle, it's gossip, and it doesn't do well, it shouldn't be categorised as a royal biography. It's simply gossip.
And it's very chippy, isn't it, that Actually, the royal family that is still here in the United Kingdom is being very successful by following the model that really comes down to us from, I suppose, late Victoria, but certainly from George V, of carrying out their duty, being above politics and not focusing on themselves, from the Sussexes, about whom it's all them.
And it's also about, of course, the monarchy being not just head of state, but head of nation, the emotional, almost the spiritual heart of the nation, the focal point. And it's the aspect of the monarchy as the welfare monarchy, as it used to be called, engaged in community work, engaged in acts of social cohesion, charity work, looking at everyone from the Girl Guides to the soup kitchens to St John's Ambulance, the unsung heroes of Britain, the unsexy issues, whereas other people like the Sussexes choose to go for those sorts of issues that have celebrity causes behind them.
And isn't it amazing how week in, week out, the Duke of Kent and the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester are out there day after day with these unfashionable institutions, making them happy and putting a little bit of royal glamour into people's lives?
I mean, I think the Gloucesters and the Kents really epitomise the very essence of nobility and what the royal ethic of duty and service and sacrifice is all about. They should now be enjoying their retirement, and they're still being forced to actually carry on many more duties than they should.
Well, I'm going to have to force you into momentary retirement because I've got to move on, but thank you, Rafe. And finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask the question, has Sir Keir Starmer lost his marbles? Well, it's been reported that Sir Keir is set to tell the Greek Prime Minister that if he were to become Prime Minister, he'd be open to a loan of the Elgin Marbles to Athens. I don't think they'd come back. The Greek leader, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, has said he will raise the issue with both Sir Keir and the Prime Minister during his visit to London, and has compared the matter to cutting the Mona Lisa in half. Well, if we had half, we wouldn't give it back to the French, would he? But if he's concerned about that, the Greeks could simply send the other half of the marbles over to the British Museum, which would look after them very well. But perhaps this is just a small taste of what a socialist government would look like. First, it's the return of the Elgin Marbles, and before you know, he'll be handing Gibraltar over to the Spaniards, and heaven knows what he'd do with the Falklands. Well, Vox Populi, Vox Dei. We asked the good people of Leeds and of Birmingham if they thought the marbles ought to be returned, and the people have spoken.
We're a British origin, and then obviously we'd be entitled for it to be kept in our country, but I think they should be returned.
I think Britain should give everyone everything back that they don't own. How are you going to loan something back that's not yours? It's theirs rightfully.
I'm guessing we stole them in the first place, so give them back to them if it belongs to them in the first place.
It's a bit complex, isn't it? I mean, it's not a straightforward, I don't have a straightforward black and white answer.
It should back to Greece because it's for them.
Yeah, I think if they're theirs, then if it's from their history and past, they deserve them back.
If we stole them, then maybe they should be returned, as with everything else we stole. But essentially, at the core of things, that's not very realistic, I don't think.
Well, I'm loath to disagree with Vox Populi, but we definitely didn't steal them. We got them legitimately, and we had all the right paperwork by the then ruler of Greece. Anyway, thank you again to Rafe. That's all from me. Up next is Patrick Christys. Patrick, what is on your bill of fare this evening?
Yes, well, I am asking whether or not we should stop all immigration for 5 years. 53% of Brits think we should, according to a new poll. I'm also asking whether or not Rishi Sunak has some family skin in the game when it comes to ensuring that mass migration continues. And Doctor Who brings the woke mind virus to aliens. All of that and much more coming your way.
Well, I hope if you're talking about Doctor Who, you'll have the famous knock-knock joke. You know how it goes? Knock-knock?
Who's there?
Doctor.
Okay. Yeah,
how did you guess my name?
More gold, more
it's going to be absolutely brilliant later. All the best jokes. That's coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jake Rees-Mogg. This has been Save the Nation, and it's going to be beautifully sunny in Somerset.
Evening, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Staying cold throughout this week. Really frosty mornings will become pretty frequent, and so will quite a bit of sunshine by day. It wasn't a lot of sunshine around today, quite a lot of cloud and still some outbreaks of rain coming into northern England and eastern England. And the showers in northern Scotland will turn to snow, but only really over the tops of the hills. Might turn a bit icy, could turn a bit foggy in places, and temperatures dropping below freezing across northern Britain, certainly in the countryside. Further south, just about holding up a few degrees above zero. On to Tuesday, we'll start with quite a lot of cloud over the Midlands, the odd shower here and there, but that should clear away. The showers in northeast Scotland will turn increasingly wintry, so some sleet and snow coming in here, certainly by the end of the day, even to low levels. For many, though, it's a
A dry and a bright day tomorrow. It's going to be cold, 4 or 5 degrees across the north, 7 or 8 further south. But feeling chilly with the winds, which will continue to bring wintry showers in across northeast Scotland, but also maybe southeast Scotland, northeast England. We could see some sleet and snow showers on Tuesday night and into Wednesday, so it could be a little icy here. Again, for many, Wednesday's dry and fine, chilly, yes, but with quite a bit of sunshine. Temperatures, though, well below average for the time of year. With the cold air in place, eyes down to the southwest, because these low pressure systems could introduce some wet weather, and that means the potential, just the risk of some snow in the south later this week.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't